Hello and welcome back to another episode of NT Movie Reviews coming at you online and in print format at nicktiffany.com, on YouTube, and all the podcast platforms at NT Movie Reviews, as well as on all social media platforms at NT Movie Reviews. Today I'm joined by director Don Hardy, who returns to SIFF in 2025 with his latest film, Bar, the perfect cocktail of a documentary focusing on students participating in the Culinary Institute of America's Beverage, Alcohol, and Resource, or BAR, 5-day program, hoping to become some of the world's greatest mixologists and bar masters. Don, welcome and thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on such an enjoyable and terrific film.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, pleasure to be here. I'm glad to be back in Seattle. And it's always one of those festivals I really look forward to.
It is so unique in terms of the types of films that are shown here, the filmmakers that they get to bring in. I know you're coming back here again, I believe, after you brought your film Pick of the Litter, I believe, was it, to
Yeah,
SIFF?
for sure, pick of the litter. And then I think going way back, we had one called Witch Hunt that was here.
Okay.
This is maybe, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. But yeah, and that one we actually finished. We did the post-production on here in Seattle. So,
Oh,
um,
cool.
town that's near and dear to my heart.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. It just, before we dive into the movie, something that always fascinates me about documentary filmmakers is sometimes I think people pigeonhole them. They say, oh, he just does a lot of war stuff, or he only, people might only do one type of documentary film. And everybody has their niche, everybody has the things they're interested in. But when I look at your body of work, it's quite vast, the types of projects and the types of stories you're telling, from traveling and talking about Sean Penn and the work that he was doing, from Linda Perry and your Let It Die Here documentary. I love the variety of films that you've chosen to make. And I was just curious, as a filmmaker and a person, what drives you to tell these different stories?
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's one maybe just lately because I have been doing this a while, and Bar is actually my 10th film as a director or co-director on a project. Um, I've started to think more about, how you get here. I mean, really, it's just life. You keep putting one foot in front of the other, and sometimes stories emerge. But reflecting on it, I think my time as a journalist before I started making docs, every day you go in and you get an assignment, and that story for the day is what you really have to focus on. So I think that part of how I'm wired is I just have this ability to get really interested in a vast array of subject matter. And a lot of ideas come up, either somebody will say something to me about an idea, and sometimes they just stick, and then you start running with it and you figure out, how do I tell this story, and how can maybe I find some money to help tell this story? Is this a story that I think could find a home somewhere in theaters or on a streaming platform, or back in the day DVDs? You just so I get interested in a lot of different things, and I've never wanted to keep doing the same thing over and over. We did the film that I came to Seattle with all those years ago was called Witch Hunt, and it was about wrongful conviction. It was like true crime before we really gave it a name of true crime. I remember distinctly after that film of we could have done more stories about wrongful conviction and innocent stories, but we went in a totally different direction. Yeah, it's just I guess it's just being curious about a lot of things.
Sure. Well, I love the curiosity, because that's something that certainly shines, I think, especially in this kind of work. And I'm just curious, for your 10th film here, how did you become familiar with Bar 5 Day? How did this story essentially come to you, or how did you find it? And what really stuck out to you about feeling like I've gotta follow this process. There's something here that's just fascinating.
Yeah, it came together pretty quickly. It was a conversation with a friend of ours, a writer named Anthony Boza, and he used to write for Rolling Stone. He's written a ton of interesting books about Tommy Lee and Eminem and all sorts of people. And so when he comes to you with an idea, you take it seriously. And he was telling me about a bartender friend of his named Maxwell, who had gone through this really rigorous course that in some ways is very similar to the master sommelier in the world of wine, but in spirits. And I was like, you need a certificate to be a bartender? Like, what is this? Um, but it piqued my interest, and it led to a little bit of research, And before I knew it, we were on the phone or on a Zoom, a couple of the founders, and they walked us through what the week would look like. And part of me was just really enamored with the challenge of
Mhm.
trying to make 80% of a feature film in 5 days. Uh,
Sure.
I think because I've gone the other side of it where it's taken like 10 years. So
Sure.
could we do it in 5 days, and could we bring this spirit of the film has a bit of a competition factor to it because you've got all of these people descending on one place to go through this course. So I knew that there was a structure to it that made sense immediately. So there was a roadmap that I liked. And they said yes. They had been approached before about having crews come in and document this program, but they'd always said no. And something about us won them over. And before we knew it, it was like in pre-production, figuring out who the characters might be, talking to just a ton of people so that we could be really prepared when we got there to film it. Because the only restriction they really put on us is they said we couldn't stop the class for any reason. It
Sure.
had to exist as it normally would, and we just had to do our job, which is perfect because that's the way I like to work. I don't like to I guess have too much of a director's control over it and say,
Sure.
stop, start, redo. I think it's our job as filmmakers to really capture it as much as we can as it's happening. So we were in alignment there, and then we just kind of went for it.
I love that. I'm glad you brought up the master sommelier test. My parents are huge winos, so I grew up immersed in the world of wine, and here in Washington, we're pretty lucky to have a wonderful wine culture that is
Sure.
just continuing to grow. And I've watched, if you're familiar with the Psalm
Yes, of
movies,
course.
watching those, it's like, oh, this is the most rigorous, painstaking test that you're going to have to study for. And it was there an aspect of coming into the bar side of things? Not that there isn't still a lot that you need to study for, but getting in that bartender, that spirit setting, there is a little bit of this aspect of like, okay, watching people make cocktails and do this, there's naturally a little bit more personality that kind of comes
Yeah.
out in that. And I loved how you touched on that with the different characters you were interviewing and with the people who were showing up to take on this challenge. I thought that was great, and it was still interesting to know that they do a lot of those same tests, whether you're looking for the nose, you're doing a blind tasting, memorizing regions and where things come from and how to blend different ingredients. It's a fascinating world. I've been a bartender. As soon as I saw the film on the list, I was like, okay, this is right up my alley. I gotta check this out. And something that just really spoke to me and stood out to me. I got to watch it with my parents who have watched the Saw movies as well. But they would come into my bar, maybe once a week and sit down and listen. There's an aspect of being a bartender where you're almost a vessel for the people who come in there. There's a worldliness that bartenders have from the stories they tell, from the things they see, the people that they meet. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on what you really wanted to show as far as bringing in these bartenders and what parts of their stories that you wanted to highlight and what kind of just drew you to focusing on the few of them that you did in their stories.
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks. I mean, you've been in there, and you know what it's like to be really committed to this profession. And I think what struck me initially is just how passionate people were for service. Not just making, yes, the talent has to be there to make a really good cocktail, but it's this idea that you get happiness from doing a great job and serving somebody else. So I was hooked by that sort of nugget. I knew about the competitive aspect. Towards the end of this week, the bartenders they have to make 6 drinks in 10 minutes in front of these icons in the industry. So I liked those two things. What I didn't really count on or plan for is getting in there and seeing how collaborative they were and how the older bartenders really try to take the younger bartenders under their wings and teach them the way to make this a profession. It isn't just necessarily a transitional job. You're working your way through college as a bartender, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
This can be a career, and there's ways to do it and be sustainable and not fall prey to some of the negatives of it. I thought that seeing the way they supported each other really, I hope, comes through in the film, because that's one thing that surprised me when we were there filming. I wanted to really point out, and of course, keep the lightheartedness and the fun and the competitive aspects, but also really highlight those unique friendships that form over 5 days.
Absolutely. Something, something you mentioned that I really loved about the film was some of that mentorship from either the adjudicators and from the people who founded Bar 5 Day, or from those older bartenders, as you mentioned, and some of the people doing work studies who are there
Yeah.
because they're so excited to be experiencing this and they want to kind of have that involvement with everybody. One of the lines that really stuck out with me in the film when they were talking to all of the different students who have traveled here, paid to be there, they were talking about, if you fail, like we don't want you to be worried about this. If you fail, we haven't done our job properly.
Yeah.
And in so many, and maybe that's where the departure for me really stuck with the sommelier testing to doing something like this. Like at the end of
Yeah,
the
it's
day,
true.
you are people, and we are here to help one another. Bartending, I'm sure in a lot of ways like filmmaking, sometimes you are in the trenches going through impossible odds, but there is that camaraderie and you're kind of going through it together. And something that I just really, I think you did such an effective job of showing in the film is how collaborative that process was with everybody, and how much patience people had for one another, and how much of an inclination there was to support the people around you, even though it's a competition. You're still giving advice, you're still listening and sharing stories with people, and I think that only makes you better in that position, truthfully. Something I was curious about was in your own experience, because I could think of probably more than a few. Have you ever had a situation that you can recall, or maybe you were on the opposite side of that? You were at the bar, you were at a restaurant, and somebody's service, kind of like you said, or maybe that interaction just really changed you in a way, or really stood out in a lot of ways that most don't, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can come up with a specific example, but I do, I feel like I've had a lot of experience being on one side of the bar. And, when people do go that extra mile, and I think right now, maybe it isn't seen as much as it should be. At least, I live in Northern California, and I think a lot of times when I go in and get served, it feels like I'm bothering people. you know,
It shouldn't feel like that.
it shouldn't feel like that, but it feels like I'm putting them out to come in there and try to spend some money and get service. So now I'm much more cognizant of when I get truly good service, and feel like I was always polite and always, uh, tried to be a good customer or a good person sitting there. But now I'm much more like in tune with like, wow, see just yes, the technique of like see how they're constructing a drink or whatever, but also just how they're treating everybody that comes in there. It's not just catering to maybe the wealthy folks at the private table. It's really being there for everybody. And let's face it, we all come in contact with, just today from the people at the airport as I was flying in that were, taking my ticket or checking me in. Did they make any eye contact? Did they try to say, hey, have a nice day? Or the flight attendant, certainly, getting to the hotel as they're checking you in. And I happened to get caught in a really gnarly Seattle rainstorm on the
I,
weekend. And so
I
by the
believe
time
it.
I made it to the front desk, I was kind of soaked, and I got a towel so I could dry off a little bit. So I just think it's made me, and I hope viewers will take this away, is a little more thoughtful.
I
That
think
the person on the other side of the bar is a person, and they have good days, bad days.
I love that. You spoke about something that they do touch on in the film. And I loved how they phrased it. Like if you're a bartender, when you live to serve others, there's almost a sickness in a way where I'm not going to feel good until I can help someone feel better about themselves. The way that I get a lot of my joy is by being able to spark that in other
Yeah,
people. And they're like it's a sickness because so many people, I think, especially these days, you undervalue kindness. You don't think about
yeah,
what a
that's right.
small gesture is capable of doing in someone's life.
And
It's
that is what it comes down to, is kindness. And I hope in everything I do, but especially in bar, if you, as you humanize people, as you give them a voice where you learn a bit about their hopes and dreams and goals, it's a lot harder to not be kind to them the next time you're in there, because now they have they're three-dimensional. It's not just transactional. And yeah, I mean, if there's one takeaway I hope an audience that sees this movie has, is that the next time they go order a drink, they're a little nicer about it. Like
sure.
that would be a simple but but
Sure.
profound goal.
No, absolutely. I was curious as a filmmaker and someone who, part of bartending is storytelling. As a filmmaker, are there moments where you feel like you might be inflicted with that sickness? Are there moments where, you are creating something for yourself, but you're also hoping to share it with others and to be received? Is there an aspect where you feel you might suffer from some of that sickness as well? And how has
Yeah,
that kind of led you in your career and in your own life?
I think that is definitely part of, in particular, probably documentary filmmakers, is because we have to, similar to bartenders, you sort of put your stuff on hold to be able to focus on somebody else's for a long period of time. And that's the only way it works. And so then when does your moment, you know, I sort of joke like when, because my job is largely on the road, very, it's hard to make documentaries in your own house or in your own town. You're always traveling. So you're kind of wandering into these worlds. And then when you come home, you sort of want to barricade yourself in the house. Like I don't take big vacations. I don't, it's my work keeps me in a lot of other people's stuff. And I do think empathy is in all of these professions. I think Kate Gerwin says it in the film is like, bartenders are empathetic people. You don't get into this because you hate people. And I think that's
100%.
the very same for document. I'm fascinated by people that and always have been. I wanted to make documentaries from the time I was like 12 years old. It just has always been attractive to me to try to tell these real stories, hopefully increase kindness. There's the idea of giving justice to people. My first couple of films in particular were about, justice and fairness. And I think that's all part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was curious as a filmmaker at any point, similar to the Bar 5 program, was there ever a program that you kind of sought out or maybe you were feeling like, hey, that could be a great opportunity to grow as a filmmaker, to maybe understand some different aspects of it?
Absolutely. So before I got into making documentaries, I was a journalist. I started in a small town in upstate New York, my hometown, and was a camera guy. And I would just go out and it started, somebody took me under their wing a bit, put a camera on my shoulder, and I was shooting high school basketball games. And I just always liked the camera part of it. And so then I moved from that TV news station down to South Florida one. And there was just a great group of people to learn from. And they were big believers in something called the NPPA, the National Press Photographers Association. And I got picked to go one year. And it changed everything for me. And just realizing I wasn't just a camera guy, but I was a journalist. I was a storyteller. I was more than just an extension of a piece of equipment. Like I could really use my brain and just be part of that process a lot more, whether I'm working with a reporter or working independently. And from that station, I ended up making the jump to San Francisco, where I met some like-minded people that really wanted to make documentaries. And we did a few for television before moving out on our own. But I really do go back to that program that was in Norman, Oklahoma. The one
I know Norman.
in Oklahoma, I think it was a week-long thing, very similar to Bar in that way, where it was super intense, learning from the best that helped shape everything that I've done. And I still think about the ethos of the NPPA when I'm out doing things. Yeah, it was a big impact.
That's such a cool transition. I'm sure that confidence was already in there. That voice of you saying that, because I get that. The extension of the camera. I'm just here to do this. I'm just here to do that. And you are so much more than that. And that's awesome to hear how you kind of learned to find that voice of yours and channel that through the types of films that you make. I was curious if there was one aspect in particular, as far as all the trainings and the testing that they had to do in the film, whether it is the written portion for your knowledge, the blind tasting, putting together 6 cocktails in 10 minutes. Which one do you stood out as probably the most challenging, or which one were you most interested in as far as watching the process kind of unfold there?
Well, I think for many of the folks, and that that's the thing that they do every day is they tend bar and they work in these very fast-paced environments. So for me, it was watching them really excel at doing what they do. But doing it in unfamiliar territory. I guess if we were drawing the parallel to me, it'd be picking up a camera I've never used before, and trying to go out and function at a high level would be really challenging. So just watching them go through that, and the way we had to be clever with how we filmed it, because again we couldn't be disruptive.
Mhm.
And so just really standing back a bit, but trying to get all of the subtleties of what they were doing, and seeing how generous and the mentors were with them. One in particular that we have in the film is, guy gets himself in a little bit of trouble by not really stirring the drink before adding ingredients, and the mentor, who is one of the founders of Bar Five, a guy named Doug Frost. He helps him out, and so looking at those little things,
That was a great moment.
yeah, where nobody's really hung out to dry. They still are they recognize that it's a high pressure thing, but they try to help them through it. And then comes the written exam on Friday, which I think all of them, everybody who participated will say that was the harder part. Going through a week of stuff that's crammed into your brain, and then trying to write it down on this test that isn't just all multiple choice where you just pick C and hopefully
only hope
get through it. It's a lot of written stuff. Somebody said to me along the way, like, most of us didn't get into bartending because we're great at writing sonnets. We're here we learn in
we're far better with our words.
Yeah, we learn in different ways. And one interesting part of making these, I've found these films over the years, is when people that you focus the camera on start seeing like a rough cut or something like that, and then they end up changing some of the ways they do things because of you pointing a camera at it. It happened with our film Pick of the Litter, which was about guide dogs for the blind. Like, they changed the way that they train the dogs because when they see it in the film, they're like, oh, we could be doing it better.
Sure.
Similar with Bar 5, they realized they could find ways to be more inclusive if they altered the test a bit, if they realize that people do learn different. Some need quiet spaces, some need more time, some need somebody to help them through the materials. So I think that's a nice sidebar, gift of making these, is sometimes you can make things better. Outside of the film, you make things better in the real world.
Absolutely. And I loved that there really was this aspect of it's not just bartenders who have been bartending forever taking this program. You've got a gentleman who's looking to open his own bar, who's like,
who's a radiologist.
I've worked in radiology my whole life, and I want to open a bar, and I want a place that is just so different from what work life is like. And he's not going for the bar ready, put me in everywhere, but he is going out of his way to educate himself, to get this knowledge and ingrain himself there. And I think that's the best part of just how supportive I think the Bar 5 group was. I could see young kids, people laugh at, what's this guy who's never a radiologist is here to do? It's, I don't want to say the jokes write themselves, but I know how people can be in terms of like seeing someone go back to school or go back to college. There's a 40-year-old woman in our college course. Why is she here? There's that first thought that you might have, but being in a space where not only are you accepted, but you're encouraged, and feeling that from the people around you, it's just something really special that I really think shown in the film, and in the way that you told the story. And it was it was really sweet to see that, because I know so many people who are interested in it. And it's like, you don't have to be the best mixologist, but there are ways to kind of learn the business and be a part of the world, like filmmaking. There are ways to be a part of a film that's not necessarily just holding the camera or just being in front of it. Perhaps there's so much that goes into it.
Totally. All of those credits you see going down the screen are jobs. I think that's really important too. I do mentor some younger filmmakers now. I try to really stress that. Like, you don't have, I guess the director, the producer gets, their name in lights more, but there's a lot of jobs to do on these. And I would say the same for the bar trade or the hospitality trade. Is you don't have to be Tom Cruise in Cocktail. In fact, we don't touch upon, I've learned the word for that is now show tenders.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that going in. So this movie is not about that.
Not in Vegas.
It's about the real, everyday folks that are just trying to do things at a high level and embrace this, what customers want. I think that's an important part of it too. Is it isn't just to be fancy or stuffy, and maybe this is where paths diverge with wine.
Sure,
Cocktails are a little bit different.
sure.
It's not that. It's about making something really, that tastes great, of course, but feels special and has natural ingredients. Somewhere in the 70s and 80s, it became like a margarita gun being fired into your mouth. So this is, a return to the older way of doing
Was your crew taking some shots at the end of the long
it.
days with the something else? It's that camaraderie side. We've been
Yeah,
through hell teaching these courses, polishing these things, and we're taking a little shot. Job well done, everybody. Now we'll be up early and we'll do it again.
I think we enjoyed our days. So I talked about, the ambition of trying to film so much of this in 5 days.
Mhm.
But what that necessitated then was a large crew. We had a lot of people there because we were essentially filming from 7 a.m. till about 1 in the morning every day. So we had crews coming in, and I was, allegedly managing this. So sometimes when it became a bit much for me, you would find me with the back of house people like saying, "Hey, so how do you pour?" like, so I was more than the crew. I was probably the one that was sneaking off a little bit more to just like
Okay,
get my moment of zen and then try
sure.
some really cool spirit that I'd never even heard of before.
Please don't bring me the Malort. Please.
Well, yes, that came out at the end, and I
Of
do
course it
have a
did. Of
quick
course
cameo
it
in the
did.
film of trying Malort for the first time. It was a wake up call.
That's one of those bartender trick. I don't even call it trick. Hey, you never had Malort before? You got to try this. I'll pour it
Exactly.
for you for free. But my last question for you, now that the film is debuting, now that it's showing, what's a cocktail that you might enjoy? Now that I don't want to say the hard part's done, but the film is out, people are loving it, the reception's coming in. What cocktail are you toasting with, and what spirit is your go-to?
Well, one of the guys that created the Bar 5 Day program, his name is Steve Olson. He also was one of the folks that brought mezcal to the U.S. with his company Del Maguey, and
Yes, okay.
getting
I
to
didn't
know.
know that was his company.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah, I believe he was one of the founders of it, along with a guy named Ron Cooper. And so Steve travels around with generally a couple of flasks and the little cups are called copitas, so
Hmm.
he got me hooked on mezcal. That is typically my go-to thing these days. And throughout
Okay.
production, a lot of the travel I did was with my producing partner, Stephanie. And everywhere we went, we tried a mezcal-based drink called a Naked and Famous. And became our go-to thing. So now when we toast, we typically will break one of those out. And it's a pretty easy drink overall. It's
Hmm.
4-part drink. If folks out there might know a last word or a
Hmm.
paper plane, this is very similar to that. 4 equal parts. You can impress all your friends if you make any of these 3 drinks. But the Naked and Famous it's a quality drink.
Awesome. I would encourage you to try a Oaxacan old fashioned.
Oh, yes.
If you've had those, then I mean that became a good segue for me into mezcal. There's some of the
Yeah.
smoked old fashioned with a little mezcal. Well, Don, thank you so much for being here. The film Bar is playing now at the Seattle International Film Festival. It is phenomenal. I can't wait to share this interview, and I cannot wait to share my thoughts on the film. Congratulations to you again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. I appreciate you having me on and the kind words about the film.